certainly a privilege for us to host today a constitutional conservative. Here's a senator, a leader who truly appreciates and stands strong on the Constitution of the United States. Not only does Rand stand strong on the Constitution of the United States, he also is a graduate of Baylor University.
Yes, he is.
I tell you what, that makes you happy, doesn't it?
Yeah, he did a little better than I did, but we were there together. Yes.
I think Rand was in the library when you were...
Somewhere else, brother, somewhere else.
What happens at Baylor stays at Baylor. That's what we know. That's what we know.
It did until today, yeah.
And then beyond his education at Baylor, Dr. Paul went on to Duke University and became a doctor. But his passion for serving people, his passion for igniting a fire around the Constitution led him in 2010 to be elected to the United States Senate and perhaps next year as the President of the United States. Please help me welcome Senator Rand Paul.
Now, Tim was kind enough to give me 5 minutes, but I can talk for a long time. So I don't see any timer anywhere, so I can probably go on as long as I want. There's no rules, no. Is that a beep already? I ran for office. I've been a physician for 20 years. I'm an eye surgeon in Bowling Green, Kentucky. It's a fairly small town. We have a university there, but we moved there because both my wife and I had grown up in small towns. My wife Kelly and I have been married for 25 years now. We have 3 boys. But I became concerned about how much debt we were piling on. And to this day, when the media asks me, what are the top 3 reasons why you're running for president? And I say, well, the debt, and the debt. Because, the thing is I don't think we can be a strong nation from debtor's court, from bankruptcy court. People say, well, we need to spend money on this, and we need $100 billion, $200 billion more for the military. And I say, well, how are we going to be strong if that's all borrowed? How are we going to be strong as a country if we simply borrow money? And so if there's a unique aspect to my candidacy, it's that I'm a fiscal conservative across the board. I don't think you can increase money for the domestic welfare or for military. Thank you. Without making sure you're spending what comes in. You have to balance things. You have to spend what comes in. Every American family can only spend what comes in. How can the government go on year after year after year adding this debt to us? We borrow $1 million every minute. It is literally out of control. And then people on the other side will say, well, where will you cut? And I say, where won't I cut? Is a better question. That's a shorter answer. But there are tons and tons, hundreds of programs. And I'll give you a few examples. We spend $43 million on a gas station in Afghanistan. Someone should go to jail for that. Some kind of inside deal was done. And $43 million was spent on a gas station. We spent $800,000 in Afghanistan on developing a televised cricket league. They don't even have TVs in Afghanistan. 1 in 10,000 people has a television in Afghanistan, and we spent $800,000 over there. We spent $250,000 bringing 24 kids from Pakistan to send them to space camp in Alabama. I don't know about you, but we've got enough problems at home that we can't be the doormat for the whole world and pay for the whole world to come here. We spent $15 million on community college for foreign kids. Now everybody says, oh, well, Bernie's going to give free education to everybody. What, the whole world or just Americans? There is nothing for free. There is no free lunch. If someone offers you something for free, treat them like a drug dealer and walk the other way. Spending is an addiction in Washington. So they're not real happy with me. I think Tim's okay with me still, but a lot of them are unhappy with me because I made a big harangue, a speech at 2 in the morning for an hour to let them know that they're ruining the country. We raised the debt ceiling an unspecified amount. We're just going to raise it till March of 2017. So whatever we can spend in that time will be borrowed. They won't have to come back and ask us. And they say, well, the president can only spend what we appropriate. That's true. But the voting on the debt ceiling is a check and a balance that we've lost. So we're raising it an unspecified amount. And what do? We busted the budget caps. But before you say, oh, it's just all those Democrats, it's the liberal Democrats' problem, it's both parties' fault. Republican leadership in the House and the Senate got together with the Democrats, and in fact, a very small amount of Republicans, 1 in 3 Republicans voted for this, 2 out of 3 Republicans voted against this in the House and the Senate. But they got together because why? There's a vocal group within the Republican Party that wants unlimited blank check for the military. And what do the Democrats want? Blank check for welfare. The unholy alliance is the compromise between right and left to spend more money. It's out of control. We're destroying the country. Someone's got to stand up and say, instead of compromising to raise both, why don't we compromise in the opposite direction and let's cut spending for everything across the board. I'd like to close by saying one other sort of summarizing one other thing about my candidacy. I want to be the candidate that represents the entire Bill of Rights. We're good at the Second Amendment. If you don't believe I support the Second Amendment, come to my house unannounced. But if you want to defend the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, you got to defend the Fourth Amendment, which says the government cannot come in your house without a warrant. But I think we should also be the party of justice. The Fifth and Sixth Amendments say the government can't take your property without due process, without just compensation. The Sixth Amendment says you have a right to a trial by a jury. You say, well, certainly we have that. Well, you know what? Sometimes we've let that down. And when you see people who are angry in some of our bigger cities, understand why. And I'm going to tell you one quick story and then I'll wrap it up. There was a young man, a black kid, 16 years old, named Khalif Browder. He was arrested in the Bronx, put in prison on Rikers Island for 3 years without a trial. He was never tried. The person who accused him of a crime wasn't even in the country legally, never showed up to do anything, but they kept delaying and delaying. Khalif Browder spent 2 of the 3 years in solitary confinement. He was beaten by gangs, he was beaten by guards, he tried to commit suicide. And then sadly he did commit suicide about 2 months ago. That shouldn't happen in America. And if we want to be the bigger, broader party that wins all the general elections, I say let's be the party of the entire Bill of Rights, and let's be the party that defends the Sixth Amendment with the same fervor and vigor that we defend the Second Amendment. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Paul, Caleb from Rock Hill wants to know your thoughts on the role, if any, of the federal government in education.
The Republican Party in the days of Reagan, and I was at the very first, when he ran in '76, I was there at the National Convention as a 13-year-old. 1980, Reagan wins, and it becomes part of the platform that we don't see a federal role. We were for eliminating the newly created Department of Education. I still am. So I don't think there'd be a federal role for the government. I'd eliminate the Department of Education. I would send it back to the states and the people. And when anybody objects to this, here's what you need to respond to them. The reason you want most of the power and the duties of government to be in your state capital, they don't have a printing press. Most of them have to run a balanced budget. And so it's good to devolve most of this stuff back because, we, as you know, we just keep borrowing more money for all this stuff. But if all education were at the state level, which it used to be and kind of still is a lot, they have to balance their budget. And there's a limited amount of money, and they'll have to make wise decisions. But I'd send it back to the states.
Thank you very much. Justin Horst from here in Rock Hill wants to know, once you're elected president, thinking about the foreign policy footprint, how would you deal with ISIS and other terrorist organizations?
The first thing I'd do is quit arming them. The Middle East is a very complicated place, and I think we've made some mistakes, frankly. I think that if you want to look at one general rule of something that's happened in the Middle East that seems to repeat itself and that maybe we should learn from, is that when we've toppled secular dictators, we've gotten chaos and the rise of radical Islam, and we've been less safe. But that goes along with Republican wars as well as Democrat wars. We toppled Saddam Hussein. We're still suffering from that. Look at it. We spent $1 trillion in the Iraq War. Nearly 5,000 of our young men and women died over there. And who's Iraq's best ally and their best friend now? Iran. Who's their second best friend? Russia. So after 5,000 of our young men and women liberating them, what ungrateful, I can't use the word on the stage, what ungrateful people that they would then choose Iran. Iran's stronger now. Iran used to be somewhat counterbalanced by Iraq. It's the same way with Libya. Hillary Clinton wanted to go to war in Libya. That's why if you think there's going to be a Democrat for you, it's not Hillary Clinton. She's the same as the other side. But she started the war, or encouraged the war in Libya. We toppled Gaddafi. We got chaos. Now a third of Libya pledges allegiance to ISIS. So I think the first thing, if you don't want ISIS to be strong, we shouldn't send weapons to the same side of the war. So in the Syrian civil war, you had Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, and ISIS. For a while, it was hard to tell which was which. They were kind of all together, but we knew there was radical Islamists. We also knew they were the best fighters. But we insisted on pouring tons and tons. In 2013, we put 600 tons of weapons into Syria, and it was us, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. Some of those weapons from Qatar and Saudi Arabia, I think, went directly to ISIS. I don't think we intentionally gave weapons to ISIS, but I think they wound up in the hands of ISIS. And think about what we're doing now. We spent $250 million training 60 fighters. $4 million a fighter. And I don't know who the genius is. Let's just say it might be President Obama. He sent 4 of them. Who sends 4 people to war? He sent 4 of them after training them, $4 million apiece, and he gave them $10 million worth of equipment. He sent 4 of them into battle. They were captured in 10 minutes. Now we've got 50 U.S. troops that are going in. That's what he's done the last week. Who goes to war with 50 people? I say you either go to war or you don't go to war, but you don't go in an underwhelming fashion. If you go to war, you go in an overwhelming fashion.
Senator Annabeth from Lancaster wants to know your thoughts on immigration, the current immigration system, how, if at all, you believe it needs to be reformed, and under what circumstances you would support those reforms.
I think you have to have a president who will enforce the law. I don't think the law has been enforced for decades. We passed a reform in 1986. It was the Mazzoli bill. And in this bill, 3 million people were granted legal status. They were here illegally. We gave them legal status, but the promise was, in exchange, we will secure the border and this will never be a problem again. All the debate we have now, we had in 1986, it's done and it will never be a problem again. And 11 million more people came. So we obviously didn't do anything to secure the border. You have to have a president who will enforce the law. And so the first thing you need is a zero tolerance. Anybody that comes in is sent back. Now that doesn't include the 11 million here. I don't know that you can send 11 million people back. So anybody that comes in should be sent back. And so it's no longer a great place to go. We put a wall around our welfare system. We say you can't come here. You just can't come here unless you come in the legal way. Once you do that, I think there probably is the ability of the United States to absorb the 11 million. And we'd absorb them through work visas. I wouldn't give them the right to vote. I would say, if you want to stay in our country, you got to have a background check. You can, we can give you a work visa if there's a spot for you. And work visas work only if they don't take an American job. That's the way that's the way the system's supposed to work. In all of that, if we're Republicans though, and we're trying to decide who our nominee is, we can't have a nominee who insinuates or explicitly tells you that all people with brown skin are rapists and drug dealers and everybody in. That's a mistake. I don't know who I was referring to there, but you can use your imagination.
We don't know either, so
Yeah.
we'll just continue to the next question. Olivia Logan from Columbia asks an important question. When you think about all the college graduates to be in the audience and some who've already graduated from college, one of the most important parts of the American dream is finding a job. I'm not sure that the government creates jobs. I'd actually think that we don't create jobs. But what would you do as President of the United States to help facilitate job creation in the nation?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. First, we have to decide where jobs are created. If you think government creates jobs, give government more money. If you think the private sector creates the jobs, leave more money in the private sector. I don't think there's any question that the private sector creates the jobs. This is one of the frustrating things in Washington, though. If you talk to all the wonks, the policy wonks, and the tax people in charge of all the committees, the people who've been there a decade or two, they are not one of them talking about cutting your taxes. That means leaving more in the private sector. They're all talking about revenue neutral tax reform, which is a bunch of fancy words for meaning half of you will pay more, half of you will pay less, and the net effect on the economy is zero. See, I want more money left in South Carolina. If my tax cut doesn't leave more money, I'll cut it again because I want more money left in the private sector. And I think we could have an enormous boom if we did that. I want a tax rate 14.5% or lower, but one single rate for everything. Business, individuals, you fill out your tax return on one card, and a lot more money stays in South Carolina.
Excellent.
Senator Cleopatra from Rock Hill wants to know your plan for strengthening Social Security so it is around for some of the young people who attend Winthrop or other folks who are maybe a decade or so away.
When I was haranguing the fellow senators between 2 and 3 about raising the debt ceiling, I brought up a budget point of order that says you really shouldn't steal money from Social Security to spend it now on something else. That's what they did. It would take me an hour to try to explain to you what these pay-fors were and how they did it, and it still would make no sense to you. But the bottom line is they took money from Social Security and they spent it on military weapons and on welfare. And so they pushed the money around. Social Security is $7 trillion in the hole. Medicare is $35 to $40 trillion in the hole. Why? The average taxpayer pays about $100,000 in Medicare taxes, but takes out about $350,000 when they retire. So it's an imbalance between, like everything else, between what goes in and what comes out. There are 2 main reasons for it. We're living longer, which is great. You know, we have increased the life expectancy probably 10 or 15 years in the last couple of decades. But with more people living longer, the costs go up. The other thing, which is probably even more dramatic than our longer lives, is we used to have a bunch of workers. We used to have, in the 30s and 40s and 50s, we had 16 workers for one retiree. Then everybody came home giddy from the war and somehow had a lot of babies, and the population boom just went up. We have all these baby boomers, and they're all retiring now. And my staff told me never to say this, and I'll probably say it again anyway today, is that what I said in the debate, it's not Republicans' fault, it's not Democrats' fault, it's your grandparents' fault for having too many damn kids. And so we had a bunch of them born, but then each successive generation's been smaller families. So now there's only like 3 workers for one retiree. So the only way you can fix it is just to be honest. There's not enough money. The only way you fix it is the next generation is going to have to wait longer. I mean, you can't get Medicare at 65 for the next generation. It doesn't affect the people on it, just about to retire, but the next generation will have to wait a little longer. That fixes 2/3 of the Social Security problem. To fix the remaining third, I would do means testing, which means the poorest among us who rely just on the Social Security check, it wouldn't affect them at all. But those of us like myself that have done pretty well, I'd get $300 less in Social Security. I've been saving. I have a pension plan in addition to my Social Security. I can weather the storm of that, but the person with no money won't be affected at all. And if we don't do that, and we keep sticking our head in the sand like we've been doing, nobody in Washington is willing to say this. They're afraid of their shadows. There's a lack of courage. And as I said the other day, there are a bunch of wimps is our biggest problem in Washington. It's fixable. You can do it over 30 or 40 years. You just do it gradually, very gradually.
Thank you. I'm going to make a note real quick. Granddaddy, grandma.
Your fault.
You should have stopped at my parents. I don't like my cousins anyways.
That's right.
I got some cousins I could do it that way. That was supposed to be funny. It didn't work really well for me. Bear with me. It'll get better later. Trey's got some jokes for you. Actually, Senator Paul asked this question. I have heard your stance on the Federal Reserve for a number of years and have supported legislation that you've had. Holly Martinez from here in Rock Hill asks a question about your stance on the Federal Reserve and perhaps maybe talk a little bit about your legislation. But what she alludes to is there seems to be a need for a regulatory environment that restricts the role of the market, stock market, and her desire is for financial stability to be created through a regulatory process.
Yeah, and I would agree. There needs to be some kind of regulation, but I would disagree that the Federal Reserve's done a good job of it. I think the Federal Reserve has actually created some of the boom environment and some of the bust environment. One of the things that is probably the most important piece of information in a market economy are interest rates. Interest is the price of money. If I give you some money that I've saved up, I've deferred my pleasure to give it to you, and you've got to pay me something for this money. That's what interest is. But it's the price of money. Most free market economists understand that we don't want price controls on bread or oil or cars because it leads to shortages. What if you have price controls on money, though? How is money so different than any other commodity? If you allow interest rates to fluctuate, here's what happens. In 2005, there were 10 home builders in Charlotte, let's say. And then the next year there were 200, and then the next year there were 2,000. What happens as more people bid houses and there's more bidding and demand for houses? The price of interest should rise. And then what happens is you get a feedback loop. In medicine, we call this homeostasis. It's the maintenance of balance. So if you've just eaten breakfast, your blood sugar is rising, insulin will rise behind it, and then your blood sugar comes down, and there's a normal, natural, cyclical nature to your blood sugar in your body. But it's counteracted by insulin. Interest rates are the same way. When you get a boom, interest rates should rise, and then only the best of projects can make it at 8%. The economy slows down. Everybody can make it at 2%, but everybody's fooled into thinking build more houses. So what we had in 2007 is we had the housing market and the prices go through the roof. That was created by the Federal Reserve keeping the interest rates below the market rate. So I blame the Federal Reserve for most of our problems. I don't think they help with stability. I think they've created it. And I think at the very least, we ought to have them open their books and we ought to audit the Fed.
Senator Steve from Indian Land wants to know how your campaign has been able to withstand the endorsement of Mick Mulvaney.
No, actually, Mick Mulvaney's the only one of you conservatives down here brave enough to endorse me, right, Mick? There you go. Now, Mick and I are very good friends, and I think that helped. I think we also came from, we are both conservative libertarians in the party, I would say. And but we're happy to have Mick's endorsement, and frankly, Mick's pretty popular down here. So yeah, we're happy to have his.
He is, and you are too, for similar reasons. You appeal to constituencies that our party does not always traditionally appeal to. Some of them are in the room today, whether it be young people, whether it be people of color, folks who have checked out of politics. If you look at the electoral map, it looks like a gauntlet for our party. How do you, or if it's not you, the nominee, appeal to groups that traditionally don't like or trust the Republican Party?
Well, and at the risk of characterizing Mick Mulvaney's policy, I'll try a little bit. He's willing to get on a Spanish language program and his crummy pidgin Spanish, speak Spanish for 30 minutes on a radio program. I don't consider that a bad thing. I consider that a good thing, that he's reaching out to people and able to speak Spanish. It doesn't mean he's like for open borders or something. I think he's about where I am. You should secure the border, and there can be some kind of solution down the road. But he's trying to interact with people who I think we have a great target audience in Hispanic voters. But we do. We have to reach out to new audiences, people who think, and you get fooled into it in South Carolina because South Carolina Republicans are just kicking butt down here. You guys win everything. And the presidency down here, you will win overwhelmingly in all likelihood. But we don't win Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, and all these states. So some of it's Hispanic vote, but frankly, some of it's African-American vote. So I've been going to places that many Republicans haven't going and saying basically three things that I think will maybe open doors for us in the African-American community. One, I don't want to put everybody in jail for a youthful mistake for drugs. I want everybody to have that equal opportunity to go to a good school, so I'd let them have a voucher and I'd let them go to any school. And then the third thing I've been saying is that in order to provide economic opportunity, instead of the government coming in with poverty programs that usually get stolen through graft and nepotism, all you gotta do is go to Chicago and see nobody that's poor ever gets the money anyway. And they realize this now. Don't send it to Washington and beg to get it back. What I would do is dramatically lower in areas of poverty. I'd draw these big economic zones and I'd virtually eliminate federal taxes and say, look, you want to move your business down there, you want to move your bank into that neighborhood in Detroit or Chicago, We won't make you pay taxes for 10 years. That adds up to enormous amounts of money and enormous amount of incentive. And I think after we've tried 50 years of the war on poverty and it not working, but I think having those ideas and showing up, I think we have a chance. Everywhere I go, it's not everybody's jumping up and down saying, oh, we're going to all re-register Republican, but they're saying Democrats have taken us for granted, and we're glad you're here to compete for our vote because we haven't seen our local congressman in years.
You were on. You were supportive of criminal justice reform way before it became cool. So was Senator Scott. There are lots of folks who are now talking about it. You were talking about it before anyone else. What does your criminal reform package look like, consistent with your belief that there is some over-criminalization and that the majority of the crime should be handled at the state level?
Right. One, I've been unafraid to compliment the president. I know the president's about as popular in South Carolina as he is in Kentucky, but I don't think people question how conservative I am. I disagree with him on most economic and tax policy, but on criminal justice, I've said, look, I think he's doing some of the right things. Some of the people in jail for crack cocaine have been there 15 years. Powder cocaine is predominantly white users. Crack cocaine is predominantly black. It's the same drug. It's the same problem. It's a terrible drug. It's a terrible problem. But why should we put one person in jail for 15 and another kid who's richer, gets a lawyer, gets out of jail, and gets probation? That ought to be fixed. It's still 18-1. So I have to have 18 times as much powder cocaine as crack cocaine to get the same sentence. I think it ought to be 1-1. I would take some of the minor, nonviolent stuff and take it from felony to misdemeanor. One of the problems is we say we're the party of family values, but how can we be the party of family values if we're locking up all the young black men and they're not at home and can't be with their families? In Ferguson, and I'm not justifying any kind of rioting or any of that stuff, but in Ferguson, for every 100 black women, there's only 60 black men around. They're all in jail. Now, probably some do deserve to be in jail. They've committed a real crime. But if it was pot or some kind of drug, punish them in some way. Make them get a job. I don't even mind if you say, you know what, you've done this, and if we as a society think it's wrong, you have to do some testing or rehabilitation. But jail's not really the answer for most people. And if you make it a felony, who wants to hire a felon? Because you think felony, you think something horrific. And maybe it was a 21-year-old kid who made a mistake that, frankly, the last 3 presidents all made that mistake and just didn't get caught.
Senator Paul, Ryan asked a very important question from Lancaster about the debt, and understands that our entitlement programs are driving a lot of the debt. How would you, as a medical doctor with your perspective and your expertise, handle Medicare and making it last longer and more affordable?
When you look at the budget, 2/3 of the budget is entitlements. That's Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. You can eliminate the other third, which we're not ever going to do, but let's say you did. That'd be military and domestic welfare spending. You can eliminate all that and you don't balance the budget. That's how far out of whack we are. So you have to do something to the entitlement programs, and they're 2/3 of the budget. Some of it we talked about, raising the age of eligibility, means testing for the Social Security and Medicare. I also think that as a society, what we have to figure out is, I'm very much a free market guy who believes in almost no government, but I can believe in some safety net for those who can't help themselves. But it needs to be permanent only for those who never are going to be able to help themselves. If you've got somebody who's missing both legs and is blind from diabetes, society can figure it out. Charity should have a role too, but society can figure out how to help that person. But if they're able-bodied like me and they're down on their luck, it needs to be temporary. And it needs to have work associated. I wouldn't give one penny out that didn't have work involved with receiving the check. Disability is one of the things dragging Social Security down. It's now 16% of disability. There is a lot of fraud in disability. We got a judge, I think, or a lawyer going to prison who's bribing judges and doctors. You can get on disability and never have to have another exam again. There's a lot of temporary problems. You should have to be re-examined, and you should only be examined, and I'm a physician, I know how this works, by a doctor who's never, ever examined you and you do not know. Because here's what happened. If you come to me, and I didn't do disability exams, but I would do exams, and people would say, well, I need a handicap sticker for parking. You think I'm going to say no to anybody? Because you're my patient, and you're my customer, and I want you to be happy with me. I might see 10 members of your family. I can't say no. So everybody gets a handicap sticker. That's the way disability works. Everybody's getting it, And there needs to be an objective doctor who says, yes, I can see you're confined to a wheelchair, you're paraplegic and you can't work. There are ways we could whittle it down, but I'm fully convinced, a significant percentage could be. And the way we need to position is, because every time I talk about this, somebody will record it and say I'm unsympathetic to those who are disabled. Look at it this way. The malingerers and the fakers are taking money from the people who are truly disabled. So the real disabled should be on my side of cutting out the malingerers.
Senator, you put your finger on something. We had a hearing and oversight where, as you know, the Social Security disability route, there's a claim officer who makes an adjudication, and then only if it's denied does it go to the administrative law judge. There are districts in the United States where the administrative law judge overturns that initial denial 100% of the time. And it's pure fraud. You've given me 2 ideas for bills today. Number one, you're right on the ratio between cocaine base and cocaine powder, and that's having prosecuted drug cases for 16 years, and I still tell you you're right.
Right.
And this need to audit Social Security disability, not just based on medical condition, but also on vocation. The fact that your back is hurt does not mean you can't do certain other jobs.
Right.
So you're giving me 2 good legislative ideas.
Well, and the only other thing I'd like to throw in on that is that work is not punishment. Work is the reward. And people who have never worked don't quite get that, and they think, oh, you're being sanctimonious. I know Tim grew up and worked hard. Your first jobs make a difference, and sometimes your first jobs don't pay very much, but you learn what it's like to get something. And every job I ever had was valuable to me, whether it was mowing lawns, working at the putt-putt golf, that was actually pretty fun, teaching swimming lessons, putting landscaping in, putting roofs on. They were all rewarding, and I felt at the end of the day I'd done something that I could be proud of. And, the 10% or 20% of our country that just is never working, I don't want to punish them. I want to give them what I've been able to have,
Well, you're right. This is the first point in Senator Scott's life that he's ever not had a job that required work. So, real quickly, Melissa wants to probe your position with respect to the executive branch. You've talked about constitutional equilibrium. One of the things the executive branch does do is pick judges, and even when Republicans are in power, they get it wrong sometimes as often as they get it right at the highest level. What is your philosophy with respect to judicial restraint, judicial activism, and what kind of judges could they look for from President Paul?
This is one where I am a little bit of a contrarian in the sense that I kind of believe in something called judicial engagement. Randy Barnett writes about this from Georgetown. And the reason I say that is that if you look at the history of the last century, most conservatives, I did this at Heritage for fun the other day, I said, all right, how many of you are for judicial restraint? Everybody raised their hand. I said, now I'm going to give you the argument for judicial engagement, which is kind of the opposite of judicial restraint. Obamacare was upheld by Justice Roberts on the argument of judicial restraint. He quoted Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was a terrible progressive who believed the majority could do anything, including Jim Crow laws. The majority doesn't have the right to take away your rights. There are certain rights that should be protected, the right to contract, to associate, to speech, all these things. I want an active court that says to Congress, you can't do this, and that would be more active in declaring things unconstitutional. In the early 30s, the New Deal programs that were overturned as being an expansion of government were all done by sort of activist judges. So I don't think it's probably not as simple as activist versus restraint. To me, I think it's sort of believing in the original intent and the text of the Constitution. The Constitution envisioned a very small government. It envisioned a government that really left almost everything to the states and the people. There's some things you can't do. South Carolina can't defend the country. They're a big part of defending the country, but you can't do it by yourself. We joined together in a union for national defense. That pretty much has to be done, and a few other things. We should have a government. Originally, the Founding Fathers didn't want to be in Washington where we are. They wanted to be in the state capital because that's where the action was, and that's where all the money was spent, that's where all the power was. If I could do anything, that's what I'd want to do. Send the power back to the states and the people.
Let's head back to the foreign policy topic. Certainly, without any question, we spend so much time talking about the Middle East because of the challenges that we see and the volatility that's always there. I think it's important for us to remain focused on other parts of the world as well. And North Korea, we have some real challenges over there perhaps. But one of the rising powers, obviously perhaps the competitor to us, would be China. And their aggressive approach to building a new island in the middle of the ocean, looking for ways to cement their position in Asia. How would you confront a rising power of China as president?
I think this is a good question. I think I'll answer it in the context of sort of what I believe in foreign policy. In foreign policy, I think there are two extremes. One extreme is that we're never anywhere, anytime, and we just say, the hell with it. We got our oceans, and we don't need to do anything. We're just going to be here and do nothing. And some would call that isolationism. But there's really another extreme. The opposite extreme is that we're everywhere all the time, and it's bankrupting us. We're really close to this one. We're not very close to the nowhere any of the time. But I also think there's a middle ground, and that's where I describe myself, is that we do have to get involved when there's an American interest, when there's a vital national interest. But people say that all the time, and you're going, well, what does that mean? What is a vital national interest? Well, you got to debate it, and it depends on the facts. That's why some have given me a hard time for initially saying, maybe we shouldn't be bombing ISIS, to actually going to the point where I said, now I do support bombing. But it's because facts change. At one point in time, I didn't think ISIS was much of a threat, and ISIS grew and became more of a threat and actually marched closer to our consulate. We have a consulate in Erbil, Kurdistan. We have a big embassy in Baghdad. And so I thought as ISIS grew, the facts changed, and we do need to be involved. Going back to China and Russia, I think there's also a spectrum within diplomacy of diplomatic isolationism and diplomatic engagement. And I think diplomatic engagement is a good thing, not a bad thing. But on the stage, we've got many people saying, well, we should not talk to Putin. That's the way we're going to punish him. We're not going to talk to him. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. Reagan talked to Gorbachev. We finally got peace because we had strength. We had a strong negotiator, but we also had an open channel of discussion. So kicking out the Chinese premier, not talking to him or not having dinner with him, I think it's the opposite. We should, the problems in North Korea, our best chance of fixing North Korea without a war is to tell China, to tell North Korea that you're not going to be fed if you don't keep it up. North Korea can't make anything. One of my favorite photos is North Korea at night. You ever seen it? It's a satellite photo. It has North Korea at night. South Korea, every light bulb in the world is on. It's just lit up like crazy. In North Korea, it looks like there's one light bulb on Pyongyang in the capital. It's nothing. They are. Bernie Sanders needs to visit North Korea. All right. But I think a lot of these hot spots around the world we can. Doesn't mean that Russia's always going to be on our side to do the right thing, but I would engage with Russia. One instance of it actually working, I think working, is that when Assad used chemical weapons and we said enough's enough, Russia did intercede and help us with that. And we got rid of the chemical weapons largely because Russia interceded. I think 2 or 3 years ago, had we engaged Russia more, Assad was very, very weak 2 years ago. He's gotten a little stronger now, and now Russia's all in backing him. If we could have convinced him to go to Russia 3 years ago, we might have been able to get some kind of settlement where then instead of having 6 different sides in Syria, there were 2 sides, a government we could support, and the crazies on the other side. But instead, we've been supporting the sort of slightly less than crazy people, hoping that they'll beat the crazy people, and the crazy people are winning most of the wars. But I'm for diplomatic engagement, with not knowing that we will have to stand up to our adversaries on occasion. But there are times also that we can have the same. Look, China has $1 trillion worth of our debt. We are interconnected, and there is a reason why China doesn't want a war with us either. I mean, probably trade is one of the biggest impediments to war.
Excellent. We're down to about 2 or 3, maybe 4 questions left before we wrap up here. So, Congressman?
Is this what you call the lightning round?
We're getting closer to the lightning round, yes,
All right,
sir.
we're getting close to it. Senator, national security, national defense, and privacy are both of constitutional significance. However, it is different when you tell law enforcement, go investigate a crime that's already taken place, as opposed to prevent the next 9/11, prevent the next Boston bombing. With respect to the NSA and the tools that we could expect in a Paul presidency, how does law enforcement prevent the next crime with the current constitutional framework?
I think that's a great question. I like the way you worded it, because when I talk about obeying the Fourth Amendment, the thing I like to start with in a lot of audiences, if there are any policemen in here, they know the Fourth Amendment. Every one of them obeys it. If they think there's a terrible person, a rapist or a murderer in a house, but they haven't seen him run in the house, and they go to the house and you're the judge, they stand there on the sidewalk and they dial your number, And what is the likelihood when the police say, we've got a guy in here we think's a rapist? You were a prosecutor. How often did the police get denied? Almost never.
Never.
But the reason we have that check and balance is there was a time in our history when it might have been a white person saying, I don't like black people, and I'm just going to knock on the door of all the black people, or all the Jewish people, or all the gay people, or whoever they are. You have checks and balances to make sure systemic bias and that a cool-headed lawyer or judge is sitting at home who wasn't chasing the person, doesn't hate that person, doesn't know the race of that person, and you're the one, the judge is at home giving that. When it comes to national security, you can do some of the same. People think a Fourth Amendment protection, even for somebody that's accused of being a terrorist, would stop us from getting terrorists. Think of it this way. I probably am more in favor of defending privacy than just about anybody you'll meet. I really don't want the government in my affairs. I don't want them looking at my records or anything. But if you call me, and I'm the judge, you're the prosecutor, and you call me and you say, well, we've got this guy. They moved here from Chechnya a while back, and the Russians have tipped us off. Can we look at his computer? I'm a hell yes. You know, you've given me just a little bit of information, but you've given me his name and suspicion. What I'm opposed to is generalized searches, where nobody's name is given and no suspicion is given. You say, if you call me and you say, well, we think there's a threat to Charleston, and I want to look at all the phone records and all the credit card information of everybody in Charleston, I'm going to tell you to take a hike, and I hope there are judges that will tell you that. But anything that's individualized, we have the ability to do it pretty fast, too. And if it's too slow, make it faster. And if you say, well, the Boston bomber, we also want to look at the 100 people he called. Look at that list, and 5 minutes later, call me again and say, we've got 5 on here who called 3 other people in Chechnya. Can we look at theirs? I'm going to say yes. But I just don't want you to look at all the Boston records or all the New England's records or all. We were looking at every American's phone records. It's a disgrace. And it came from a guy, President Obama, who said he was at one time for our civil liberties until he became president, and he wasn't so much.
Thank you.
Very good. Marissa Crawford from Columbia asked the question, South Carolina is suing the Obama administration over the president's Clean Power Plan. Do you see a problem with states enacting carbon taxes on their own? And what's your position on the
Well, that's a good question because that's a different spin on it. I'm against the federal government doing it.
Yes.
But whether states are not going to do it, a lot of things, even things I object to, states can do. So I wouldn't say there's a law that South Carolina can't enact regulations. And I think there is a role for government in pollution. But you do have to, the president's fond of using the word balance. He says he wants, he poll tested the word, I think. But he says he's for a balanced approach to everything. We really should have a balanced approach to the environment. We should protect the air, we should protect the water, but we should also balance it against the economy. And so, for example, with the coal plants, and I'm a little bit biased because I come from Kentucky and we have quite a bit of coal and quite a bit of coal plants, but we do have rules on what comes out of the smokestack. We have for 50 years. And the one question, and I hope you will repeat this to everybody you meet, if you only remember one thing today, remember this. Ask these people who are nuts over alarmist and apocalyptic that the world's ending over carbon in the air. Ask them whether or not the environment is cleaner now than it was 30 years ago. They'll say, they won't get it, and they'll say, oh, no, it's dirtier now. It's way cleaner. Compare the air to 1960. Compare the air to 1910. In 1910 in Pittsburgh, you couldn't go out at noon in a white shirt and not be covered in soot. And Jon Stewart one time said to me, he said, oh, well, that was the government. And I said, well, yes, some of that was the government. But sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide, mercury, all have gone down over many decades. We don't want to make the rules for emissions so stringent that you can't have a car or that you can't have electricity. We need to balance trying to protect the environment with reasonable, rational rules. And I think it's just gotten out of hand, some because we don't ever vote on any of this. So the check and balances is, I think something like the Clean Power Act regulation, the greenhouse gas regulation is such a big deal and will be so transformative in a bad way to electricity in our country that it ought to be debated in the open and voted on by Congress, but it shouldn't be done unilaterally by the president.
Senator Sarah from Simpsonville wants to know what President Paul would do with Iran.
I wouldn't have defeated Iraq, who was their biggest enemy. I would have left Iraq as it was, not a great place, but it was a counterbalance to Iran. I wouldn't have signed and voted against the Iranian agreement. But I'm careful to say that many conservatives want to say, I'm stronger than you. I'll do more than you. I'll bomb them before you'll bomb them. I wouldn't. Some have said they would tear up the agreement with Iran. I wouldn't do that. I'm fearful that it won't work, and that's why I thought there wasn't enough leverage to cause them to comply. If it would have been an agreement that slowly removed sanctions over like a 5-year period, and they had to prove compliance all along the way, and we could keep on sanctions and not just have to start over completely, which I think is going to be very difficult, I might have been for some kind of agreement. But Iran has a history of duplicity. They have a history of not being honest. They have a history of being cagey and coy and clever with evading any kind of international rules. And it's hard for me to believe that they're going to adhere to their agreement when the next day they're with a rally of 500,000 people chanting "Death to America," and burning our flag. And it's hard for me to believe that, because it takes belief and trust. The fact that we completely separated out, there's 4 or 5 Americans over there. How hard would it have been to get the release of 4 or 5 Americans before we did an agreement? So there's a lot of things I would have done differently, but I would separate myself from some on the Republican stage and not completely discounting negotiations, because if you think tomorrow you can bomb Iran and it's all over and we'll make it into a paradise over there, 70% of their public's under 35, and most people believe they're pro-Western. They're held under the yoke of the mullahs and the religious authorities, but there's still a lot of friendliness to the West. The minute we start dropping bombs, I think most of that friendliness that has the potential to maybe overthrow the regime evaporates. And after the first bomb, you have to realize there'll never be another inspection. We still do have inspections. So while we don't think they're perfect, we're worried they'll cheat, we do have international inspections. After the first bomb, no more inspections. And my guess is you would have 100% resolve by everybody in the country to build a nuclear weapon because they were bombed. So there isn't an easy answer that's a military solution, and we should try a negotiated solution, but I would have hoped we would have done it more from a position of strength, and I think he sort of started out giving away most of the cards before we got into the negotiations.
South Carolina is the home to a lot of veterans, served our country really well. And today we have with us a number of law enforcement officers who continue to keep us safe as a public. And we should give a round of applause to all the police officers and emergency responders. God bless each and every one of you. The question that Hudson Johnson has is, how would you improve the VA and reform the hospitals that have had so much negative attention?
I worked in 3 different VAs. I worked in the Durham VA, the Fayetteville VA, and the Asheville VA. So I know how they work. I know the good parts of them and the bad parts. The interesting thing is, for all their faults and all their warts, you ask most of the veterans, they actually kind of like the VA. They get to be around people who also served, and when they go, and the quality of care, when you get it, is not bad, I think. I did it in a teaching institution, so there was always a younger doctor and a doctor with 10 or 20 years experience. We were learning, but it was very high quality care, and I don't think anyone should think that in a teaching hospital you're getting less than high quality. You really get high quality care. You don't get very good distribution of health care. So the quality is pretty good, but the distribution is the pits. And I'll give you one quick story. When I was a student, you could go home after you worked up one patient on the internal medicine rounds, and I found that I was getting him at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and I'd ask the veteran, I'd say, when did you get here? He said, I've been here since 10 this morning. We've been drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes, and doing all this other stuff outside. And I said, you've been here since 10 this morning? What are you doing? He says, I don't know. It takes them 6 hours to check me in. Because government doesn't do anything very well. They don't have the profit incentive to streamline things. And so I found out that if I went down there and we got to pick which veteran was going to be our patient, I'd go down there at 10 in the morning. I'd shoot the breeze with them. I'd ask them what was wrong with them. I'd do their entire history before they were checked in. I knew somebody in EKG and X-ray. I'd get their EKG and X-ray done before they were checked in. I'd go back up for an hour to research their disease because I was supposed to learn about the disease and how to treat it. I would write their admission orders. I'd have everything done. When they finally were checked in at 10, I'd say, I'm done. Because the system was just so bad. And so it is a single-payer system. Right now we're building a VA in Aurora, Colorado for $1.8 billion. 182 beds. It's $10 million per room. You would think there'd be gilded gold faucets or something in it. The government can't do anything very well, and it's an open question whether they're inherently stupid or whether it's just endemic to government. I think it's just endemic to government because they don't work on a profit basis. So I wouldn't get rid of the VA system. I would probably keep what we have, and I would slowly over time, when we need more space, give people more vouchers to go into the private system. The hospitals are just so expensive, and I don't think there's a huge advantage. There are a few things that are, I think, distinctive to veterans. Burns, unfortunately, amputations, post-traumatic stress disorder, that I would spend a special amount of money and have specialized facilities for that, closed head injuries from concussions. And so I would have specialized facilities and really be the best in the world at those kind of things. But if you're 55 years old and you're eligible to go to the VA and you need a colonoscopy, I'd let you go to your local doctor so you don't, so we don't keep building inefficient VAs where everybody's waiting in line.
Hear that, amen.
Sir, I can tell by the look on Senator Scott's face that this is my last question. So I want to ask you something a little different because I've asked all the audience questions. 3 of us had the pleasure of serving with your father. How is he doing? What is he doing? And your family in Kentucky, your wife and your family, if you were to ascend or descend to the presidency, depending on your perspective, they would be known by the entire world. So give us a glimpse inside your home in Kentucky and tell us how your father's doing.
My dad's doing great. He's 80 years old. He's as fit as anybody in the audience who's 20 years old, probably. We joke that he eats nuts and berries, and I think that's what he does eat. He's very thin. He works out every day, walks 3 miles, rides his bike 3 miles, and is still very active in a lot of facets of things. People, there was all that talk about what Trump's dad gave to him. Did he give him $1 million, $100 million, $200 million? My dad didn't give me any money directly, but he paid for my education, and to me that was worth an enormous amount. And I'll always be grateful for that. He had a lot of books around the house, and from many of those books I read the great free market economist Hayek, Adam Smith, Milton Friedman. So he's doing great. My own personal family, I'm married. I've been married for 25 years. I have 3 boys. One starting work in Atlanta, just finished college. One who's a sophomore in college at University of Kentucky. And then I have one in high school that's still at home. We're a close family, and we go to church on Sunday, and we believe in right and wrong.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, have you guys enjoyed the hour we ran? Senator Paul, this will be the last question. The last voice that you guys will hear today will be from Senator Rand Paul, who I think has done a great job. One of the things that I'm looking for in the next president of the United States is someone who actually brings this country together, someone who does not play off the fears and works on the strategy of divide and conquer. How would you, as the next president of the United States, bring America together so that we can see the next great American century?
I think there is room for compromise in Washington, and it just needs to be compromise going in the correct direction. So like if you and I have a debate over Social Security and we kind of finally get to the point where, which I think we have to, the age is going to have to go up, and I say it needs to be 70 in 20 years and you say it needs to be 69 in 35 years, we can split the difference on so many things like that. The problem we face in Washington is that many of us are willing to make the reforms to save Social Security. The other side doesn't even want to talk about it yet. So that's why it's hard to get to compromise. On the things that I've done in Washington, though, I think I've proven that regardless of party, I will work with the president on criminal justice reform. I've also worked with Ron Wyden on privacy. He and I don't agree on much of the economic liberties side, but on the civil liberty side and the Fourth Amendment, we're very much together. And when I've opposed things, I honestly do oppose giving more power to the president, not because of this president. I mean, I would honestly oppose giving myself the same power or giving any Republican the power, because one of the biggest problems we have is so much power has gravitated to the presidency. Presidency is like 1,000 times more powerful than Congress, and they're supposed to be equal. And so I think I'm an honest, I am very much a believer in ideas of freedom and limited government, but I'm not so much a partisan that if you have a great idea and I agree with you and you're a Democrat that I can't work with you.
Very good. Thank you.